for the panel discussion, but we'll go ahead and get started. It's 11:32 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Welcome to this month's RAMP meeting. If you are live streaming and are not a member of RAMP, we're opening up this discussion to everyone, not just the mentors and the companies, but there may be some other people logging on through YouTube here shortly. If you're on Zoom and you have questions from the panel who will be introduced a little later on by Dr. Greer, you can on Zoom just submit those questions through chat, and Dr. Greer will be monitoring those on his feed, and he can help organize and aggregate them in a meaningful way for the panel. If you are looking at this on YouTube, you can use the comment feature. So please take advantage of that. And we have someone monitoring that. And Dr. Greer, we will then submit those questions to you through the chat feature on Zoom so that we close that loop. Paul, if you will advance to the next slide. So here's what's going to happen today. I'm about to launch into the welcome, as I am now, and give a little bit of background information. Dr. Greer will introduce our panelists, and we're very happy to have them and appreciate the effort Dr. Greer went through, because he had a very, very tight budget to work with. So we very much appreciate our panelists. We then have what we call 5 points by Makeda Nichols, who is one of our mentors. This is where we ask one of our mentors to 5 bullets, 5 minutes, meaningful words of advice or lessons you've learned in your lifetime in the business world that say you would pass on to a colleague, a son, or a daughter. And we're very fortunate to have one of the companies in the cohort, as we say, in the group, Brooks Conkle of the Mobile Rundown, who will talk a little bit about his business. And then we'll conclude with Angela Jordan making a few announcements. So Paul, if you will go to the next slide. So I'll tell you just a quick history of RAMP. We've been in operation basically since 2018. This is a program that was licensed from MIT. MIT's been doing this for a long time, over 20 years. They've trained probably 180 teams from 70 different countries. And we were fortunate to be able to be one of those teams, but it really came about because of collaboration of the people that you see at the bottom of the screen. The University of South Alabama provides my time, that of Angela Jordan, and Don Mosley, who is the director of our Center for Entrepreneurship in the Mitchell College of Business. Danette Richards with the Mobile Area Chamber of Commerce. Originally Haley Van Antwerp with the Innovation Portal. She still serves as vice chair. And now Michelle Parvenrou, who's the new executive director, forms part of our leadership team. The Small Business Development Center is headed by its regional director, Mel Washington. He was one of the original members of the team. But the original funding came through the Mobile County Commission, the City of Mobile, and the Chamber of Commerce. And then follow-on funding, we very much appreciated our sponsorship from BBVA. And Dr. Todd Greer was part of that group in the early going. He was not yet with the University of Mobile. Dr. Greer now is with the University of Mobile and is provost and vice president of academic affairs. So what I would tell you just a little bit, Paul, about the history. We've been operating since 2018. We've served a little more than 30 companies over the program's lifetime. We have 32 active mentors, and as you'll learn later, we're onboarding 3 new companies, or have onboarded 3 new companies, which you'll hear about later. We host monthly meetings for our mentors and bring in guest speakers like the panelists today from the best business leaders in the region. And if you'd like to, if you missed Brent Barkin or Elliot Maisel or some of the speakers we've had in the past, we have those logged in on our website, and they're available for you to view. And today is one of those examples where we bring in companies that are members of RAMP into the monthly meetings because we think you would appreciate and enjoy the panel. So we've been very lucky. We've had a great team that I've mentioned, and a lot of help from the mentors and the companies. To the extent that MIT reaches out to us from time to time and ask us to help market the program when they do calls with other universities or communities in the United States who would like to explore this model. So that is what you need to know about RAMP, except, Paul, if you are interested if you're a company out there on live stream interested in participating in RAMP, or you know a company that should be, please let us know. You can contact us there. I can tell you that we look for a couple of key things in the companies: diversity, coachability, sustainability, the ability to scale, and hopefully some revenue. There's some exceptions to that, but those in large form are the things that we look for. So that's the welcome. That's my short history of RAMP, and it's my pleasure now to introduce Todd Greer and to thank him for putting together this panel. I would say that not only is he highly qualified to put together a panel like this, but he himself has been a large part of not only the birth, but also the growth of the ecosystem here. So thank you, and Dr. Todd Greer, take it away.
Hey, thank you. Since you call me Dr. Todd Greer so many times, I'm going to call you Dr. Michael Chambers as I do that. So awesome. Listen, today is a 4-year journey kind of all coming together. 4 years ago, in back-to-back weeks, I had the opportunity to first fly to Kansas City for the first eShip Summit. And during that first eShip Summit, I got to meet some of our panelists that are joining us today, to learn some of their stories, to see the amazing impact that they were having on their community. And then the very next week, we flew to Boston to MIT for the RAMP training. And so back-to-back weeks, it was like I was a kid in a candy store, as somebody who has a deep passion for entrepreneurship, to be able to think about how do we continue to grow and move our community forward. And so I'm excited to have with you. You guys don't even recognize this. I'll give you their bios, and their bios are just the beginning to start of how amazing these 4 individuals are. So I'm going to start with Gabe Munoz. Gabe has been actively involved in the KC entrepreneurial ecosystem for 13 years. He works to create a unified community vision to best serve entrepreneurs while creating a welcoming and inclusive culture that places the needs of the entrepreneur front and center. That's an important point right there, the needs of the entrepreneur front and center. Prior to coming to Forward Cities, he served as the Director of Sales and Small Business Advising for the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Greater Kansas City. In his role, he was responsible for cultivating and maintaining relationships with startups, government, nonprofit agencies, community leaders, corporate America in that work. During his 12 years, he assisted over 1,000 micro enterprises in getting licensed, certified as minority and women business enterprises, and connected in the community. And this is an important fact too. He is the second oldest of 9 children and an avid fan of the Chiefs. While you guys have a great run, Kansas City Royals. As a Tigers fan, I despise that. And KU basketball, and nobody really likes Rock Chalk Jayhawk, do they really? Besides people from that Kansas area. But in his free time, you'll find him playing soccer and spending time with his wife, Julia, their 4 children, Devin, Diego, Daisy, and Desiree. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us. Awesome. Next with us is Cecilia Wessinger. Cecilia is a force. I had such an opportunity to watch her facilitating and really working so much in that first eShip Summit. She is an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder and the founder of Mass Collaboration. Her work is centered on collaboration, equity, and community culture. As a certified cultural competency and unconscious bias facilitator, she moves conversations beyond just diversity and inclusion to connecting, engaging, and belonging. Her eShip path led to winning startup competitions. She was a former lead organizer of the Kauffman 1 Million Cups program. She played a consulting role in the eShip community. She has supported ecosystem practitioners all around. She was a South by Southwest pitch advisory member and a multiple-year delegate to the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is an amazing, cool thing in and of itself. In addition, she works with the Future Agro Challenge and serves on the board of Startup Champions Network and the Institute for Work and Economy. Cecilia, thank you so much for being with us. Next on my list, Jeff Slobotsky. Jeff currently works for Paul G. Smith and Associates, a development and investment firm. where he oversees business and ecosystem development for Millworks Commons. He's the founder and managing partner of Router Ventures, a seed stage venture firm that bypasses place to connect talented people and impactful companies with global game-changing resources from around the world. Prior to his current role, Jeff started Silicon Prairie News, a digital media and events company dedicated to highlighting, connecting, engaging, and supporting the entrepreneurs outside of the traditional startup hubs. Welcome to Mobile, Jeff. Among other events, the Silicon Prairie News launched the annual Big Omaha Conference, now MAHA, bringing in together 750 plus founders, investors, entrepreneurial leaders from across the country. He and his team organized numerous events to connect the broader community. One event, that Big Omaha Conference, has brought together more than 750 entrepreneurs from 25 states, and it's now into its 12th or 13th year here. Outside of his day-to-day duties, he serves on the board of the Greater Omaha Chamber. He currently serves on the board of directors for Defy Ventures Nebraska. He was a member of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Shapers, was named one of Forbes' up-and-comers, along with his recognition from Omaha JCs of being one of Omaha's 10 outstanding young Omahans. I hope I said that right. He has been recognized in a variety of national publications and media outlets, including Time, Forbes, Wired, Fast Company, and Inc. magazines, as well as on such small things like CNN, Kiplinger Finance, New York Times best-selling author. Seth Godin has called him out. He's kind of a big deal. We're so thankful to have him with us. Thank you, Jeff. And last, but certainly not least of our panelists, somebody that is near and dear to my heart. Before I even knew her, I saw her fingerprints in the Richmond startup scene during my time in Richmond. Larkin Garvey is the current president of Lucky Duck Retreats, the founder of the Good Work Society. She's a founding member of the Startup Champions Network, where she also served as interim executive director and chair of the board. She's an ecosystem builder and civic instigator with a passion for supporting founders and building inclusive communities. In 2011, she founded 804 RVA, Richmond, Virginia's first technology-focused co-working space. In 2012, she joined Startup America, expanded her work from community building to startup ecosystem building. And since then, she's launched Lighthouse Labs, which is a top 20 nationally ranked accelerator. And trust me, I follow them on LinkedIn, and you should see the news coming out of them recently. Startup Virginia, which is an incubator, RVA Maker Fest, attracting 10,000 participants annually, a pre-accelerator at VCU. She brought national programs to Richmond, including Unreasonable Labs, Co-Starters, Startup Weekend, Startup Next, has hosted over 900 technology and entrepreneurial events. She has also presented at the White House about connecting Virginia's entrepreneurial hub, was recognized in Style Weekly's top 40 under 40. She serves as a board member for Girls for a Change. She is a serial entrepreneur whose current mission is to support and build diverse and inclusive ecosystems. Larkin, thank you so much for being with us. Woohoo! Well, I'm going to ask the panelists, if you guys wouldn't mind, go ahead and unmute. If you are if you're viewing but not one of our panelists, I'll ask if you would just to stay muted during the time. If you have questions, as Michael mentioned earlier, please make sure that you go ahead and place those in the chat or the Q&A listed below. So let's get this going. And I, obviously, the four of you guys know each other, and it's not your first rodeo having these conversations. It was funny as we were engaging in email, everybody's like, oh yeah, hey, we've done this a couple times before. So easy going. Let me start with this. And Cecilia, I'm going to bounce to you first, and then Larkin, Gabe, and Jeff, if you guys would follow. Why, in your opinion, should anyone care about this idea called ecosystem development?
Oh, why should they care? Because it's the mycelium that kind of connects all communities. I think what people don't understand sometimes is that ecosystems actually already exist. It's a matter of whether or not they function symbiotically together and work together. People ask a lot about pick a city, a random city, and they'll say, so what is that community like? And sometimes you'll hear things like, it's fragmented, it's siloed, there's a lot of ownership, it's heavily curated. That's true of everywhere that I've ever touched upon. But there are people, if you had a startup and you were to ask 20 different people in your community, what should I do? Where should I go? What do I need to know? And likely they will say, oh, you should find this organization or that program. But there'll be two or three names that keep popping up. And Todd, I know that you're one of them because you've been in that space before. And so if you were in Mobile and you wanted to create a startup, chances are a few somebodies will say, oh, you need to meet Todd because Todd knows all of these things that are going on. And so we're here to help support organizations get a little bit further down the line. I can't promise you that we have all the answers, but we may be able to help you navigate 2 or 3 steps further and see a little bit wider vision. So that's what's important, because our job as ecosystem builders, our job as a community, is to support entrepreneurs in getting from ideation across that valley of death to revenue as quickly as possible before they burn out, they lose their sanity, they lose their funding or their energy.
That's awesome. Cecilia, thank you so much. And Larkin, without just going into a ditto of what she said, where would you see that you saw as an extension there for you guys?
I think that if you're not thinking about an ecosystem as a whole, or having an intentional strategy or plans around how you can connect the silos, you're leaving so much potential on the sidelines. In a sports analogy, like think about if you have your star athletes and they're sitting on the sidelines and you don't even know it. That's very often what happens in communities where they're not thinking about ecosystem approaches. Especially when we talk about building, inclusive communities. There's so many entrepreneurs out there that are just not being served when people are not truly building ecosystem support services or, thinking about how they can connect with one another. The long-term goal is if you build a thriving and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem, you're reducing the barriers for entrepreneurs, right? So the easier it is for an entrepreneur to get to that investor, to get to their next customers, to find partners, to get capital, whatever it is that they might need, if you make that, you work with your localities and to make it easier to get permits or licensing or whatever it might be so that they could then, create more jobs, bring in more wealth into those communities. But very often, like we're just now coming out of COVID, governments are finally starting to really embrace the idea of entrepreneurs and how to support them. But for so long, that's not been an approach. It's kind of, we've taken entrepreneurship for granted as something that just happens because people choose to invest in our communities. But when we're intentionally trying to work with them, listen to them and connect them, and really building a network, an entrepreneurial ecosystem is really just a strong network for connecting those entrepreneurs. So it's really, if you're not doing that, you're missing out on all of these opportunities for having more wealth, more jobs, and more, support within that community. And also, if you don't understand why people leave, like, entrepreneurs very often will leave because they're not feeling that support. But if you're not having a plan to say, okay, we want to support X type of entrepreneurs or, with the programs around it, then those are just kind of leaking out of your communities and going to other places where they really want to be within your community.
That's great. And Gabe, let's take this into the flesh of what's happened in KC. Obviously, with the Kauffman Foundation there, it's not that KC is a new ecosystem, but how has your community come together as an ecosystem to support the entrepreneurs in that KC metro area?
I would say here we're really looking at especially diversity and inclusion and the importance and making sure that the entrepreneurial ecosystem is equitable. We have so many communities that have been left behind. COVID really helped expose that. And so what we've done is really brought together the different ESOs to have a discussion as to who are serving the different groups within the community here. Where are the gaps that are existing? How do we really create an ecosystem that's definitely more equitable. And so we've been working with different community groups and organizations to have a focus on that diversity and inclusivity. We've launched several different pilot projects once we were able to have these conversations and figure out where the gaps are. That have really been able to create some on-ramps for folks to be able to get plugged in, to feel like they actually can have a voice, to feel that they're being represented, especially when it comes to a lot of the small businesses that we're working with, the solo entrepreneurs, the family-owned businesses, that before felt like everything was geared towards tech, or everything was geared towards big companies and getting tax breaks. And they felt that there was nobody out there really being a voice for themselves. They weren't politically connected. They didn't have a lot of these networks, and so creating systems for people to be able to get plugged in and feel comfortable that they can speak and that they can ask for help. I think that's the really big important part, is creating a culture for people feel like it's okay to ask for help. So many people don't know how to, or don't know what help exists. So I think that's, you have to focus on your ecosystem in order to fill those gaps.
That's awesome. And I want to bounce over to Jeff. And Jeff, I want to give you a specific area that I think is unique. We've oftentimes talked about the challenge of storytelling in our community. So how do we make sure that we get news out? How do we make sure that we're telling the story of our entrepreneurs? And so programs like this have helped us extend it. But you did something really unique in Omaha. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the startup, the Silicon Prairie News, and the work that did to help really fortify your ecosystem.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Todd. And excited to be a part of the group and the community for sure. So yeah, as I think back to the days of Silicon Prairie News years ago, a lot of it was frankly telling the story of the entrepreneurs and the founders that we knew were here in the city and in the state and in the community, right? And a lot of the early stories weren't even tech focused. It was a creative web designer that was doing work for the NFL here from Omaha, Nebraska. It was a local independent theater operator who opened up her own theater after spending some time in New York and then moving back home to Omaha. And so a lot of the storytelling is really just focusing on what we can do as a community to kind of highlight, promote, and kind of shine the light, if you will, on some of those emerging entrepreneurs that are in the city and in the community. So I think that's key, is the storytelling part of it.
And Cecilia, you hit it earlier, you mentioned symbiosis, okay? And so when we talk about ecosystems, we're really talking about this idea of a biological concept that was brought to entrepreneurship to say, the traditional model of, hey, we're just going to plant rows of crops and expect this entrepreneur to grow in a very, cookie cutter fashion, it doesn't work. And so we recognize that there's the interaction of a really unique framework, and Rainforest is that great book that kind of unpacks a lot of that for us. But talk a little bit, if you would, Cecilia, in the Tulsa area, what kind of unique symbiosis has taken place? Maybe an organization that has really had an outsized impact on entrepreneurs in that community through that symbiotic relationship.
So to be frank, I don't do a lot of work around Tulsa, but I have been instrumental around that. In fact, I just came from a 1 Million Cups meeting. And at one time, I was facilitator for 1 Million Cups here. And that's a volunteer organization. And the interesting thing is, when you get a program like 1 Million Cups, which is powered by an organization outside of your city, you take the framework that you have and you make it your own, right? So when I led 1 Million Cups, it looked different than how the current iteration looks, but it takes some kind of framework and some modeling, and then learning best practices from other communities. So the person who introduced me to 1 Million Cups was also there. He was lead organizer about 6 or 8 years ago. And his vision of 1 Million Cups also looked different, but it evolves just like any community will. So I think and it just has been a through line through the whole the whole path of what the city has done. And for many of you, maybe 2 weeks ago, the eyes of the world were on Tulsa. Because of the largest race massacre in modern history took place 100 years ago in this city. From that, out of the ashes of that community, we're working to revitalize the Black entrepreneur community. It's not to say that there haven't been Black entrepreneurs since, but at one time they owned hotels and theaters, and they were the whole idea of Black Wall Street was encapsulated in Tulsa. Tulsa was one of many, though. Richmond has a Black Wall Street history. Durham has a Black Wall Street history. Ours is unique, but it's not the only story. And I think that when you catalyze people together in a community, that's where and I want to go back and say that the book that you mentioned, written by Victor Huang, who is the vice president of entrepreneurship while I was at the foundation consulting, who Larkin and Jeff and Gabe and you all know. One of the things that he tried to hone in on was the fact that we shouldn't just try to be the next Silicon Valley, right? Replicating what works in other places isn't how you're going to sustain your ecosystem. There are things that Mobile is uniquely qualified to do better than anyone else. So finding out what that is, and then having that consistent through line, like a 1 million cups or this program with MIT, to just kind of evolve those things and move it forward is definitely helpful. So hopefully I've answered some of your questions.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a helpful reminder to us about that. And I know, for many of us, we recognize that this idea of being the next Silicon Valley was a cool thing in the front end. And then we recognize there's never going to be another Silicon Valley in the same way. And so how do we be the best us that we can? I think that's a great point. Larkin, if you would talk a little bit about kind of how the Richmond ecosystem has come together. Obviously, you've kind of had your fingers in a lot of places, but through co-working, acceleration, other things, what kind of sits in the system that really allows it to flourish?
It starts with the people, having a willingness and a desire to support the entrepreneur. So from the very beginning of the work that, we collectively did, we always put the entrepreneur at the center, and just kind of tried to keep coming back to that of like, what are the gaps? What do they need? So early on, one of the first things that I saw as a gap and a problem in our community is that we had, many companies that were leaving the region. They were going to get capital in other places. And I had literally had investors come up to me and tell me that there was nothing worth investing in our city. So that was where we started. And, that's a hard hill to climb. But what I saw on the ground was that, okay, we've got this disconnect here. We've got, there's plenty of wealth. There's, a lot of wealth that's always been in Virginia, specifically in Richmond. And so we launched really the first accelerator initiative, which was called Lighthouse Labs. When we tried to get the funding and support for that, we went around town, asked for support, and we were told no. In fact, we were told it would be an embarrassment and that we should not run the program. So, being a serial entrepreneur that I am, I'm willing to push forward. My partner, Todd Knuckles, and I, we launched the program anyway. We didn't have any capital to give to the companies, but we just said, let's just see what happens, right? What if we just take 10 companies, they have day jobs, we don't give them any money, but we take them through a program, we just try to give them some skills. And, from that first cohort, 8 of our 10 companies finished the work, and they were able to collectively raise $1.2 million, which, given something with the obstacles that we had, that was, okay, this is significant. This is a proof of concept of, we hear you, but that what you're saying is not actually true. There are companies worth investing in. Now, if you think about the education system, I like to use the education system when we think about entrepreneurial development. So basically we had, Series A investors, so think of that like college, but we didn't have K through 12, right? So we were expecting our companies to be able to come forward and be ready for college and pitch to these investors and get funding, but they needed that K through 12 education. So, we launched Lighthouse Labs was a version of that, but there were other touch points that were needed. We had startup weekends, which I call startup weekend just an exercise in entrepreneurship. You're not necessarily going to get, companies founded over a weekend, but people are going to get to practice that. It's going to get the community, working with it. We did, a lot of pre-accelerator programs. The universities started to come on board. Our corporate partners at first didn't want to support it because they saw this as a threat. They were thinking of the workforce and how, why would we want to support entrepreneurs, right? Like we want to bring people into our companies to work for us, not go start their own ventures. But over time and working with us, they learned that you're actually better off if you have a thriving entrepreneurial community. One, you have potential products that you can work with them on, but two, they actually were able to attract better talent. So if they're trying to get like think about Seattle, you can go to Seattle and work for Microsoft, but there's also a thriving entrepreneurial community. So if that deal doesn't work out with Microsoft, they see that opportunity of secondary options for them and starting their own ventures. So our corporate partners started to align around that as well. But none of this happened overnight. It was lots of convenings, bringing mentors together, and really having kind of this philanthropic approach to kind of paying it forward and supporting, the next founders as you go along. So, now what's so exciting now is that you have these founders that have, graduated from the programs and they're coming back and they're helping those behind them. And that's, we're starting to reach that critical mass where like, this is what you want. You don't want, like, I no longer run Lighthouse Labs. There's many people there running it, working for it, fully staffed, but that was, almost 10 years in the making to get to that point. So it truly is it's a long-term journey and voyage in helping develop an entrepreneurial ecosystem. But in the beginning, if you said, is there an ecosystem, to Cecilia's point, it's there. We had some components, but we weren't recognizing how we were part of that, and now we've got, just different partners, ecosystem support organizations that are raising their hand and they're saying, okay, how do we do this here? Our school doesn't have entrepreneurship programs. How can we engage that? Or, the Girls for a Change is an organization specifically for Black girls and other girls of color, and I worked with them to help them develop a training program that would bring small businesses and give internship opportunities to the girls there and help plug them in. So, it really continues to grow and thrive, but it takes work and time and dedicated people.
Well, and I want to hit this because I hope you guys are all hearing the individual stories and the blood, sweat, and tears I think that our four panelists have put into helping other people grow. And that's what it starts with. It starts with that idea of giving first, and you each have done that. Gabe, you guys have a little bit of a unique situation. I want to touch for a second. If you could talk a little bit about kind of public and private partners, because I know, one of the things in every community is to figure out who's going to come into play. And Larkin, you touched a little bit on kind of where those institutional partners are, what that looks like. If you could kind of talk a little bit about maybe even from the foundation perspective, as well as your city government, as well as other local businesses as they've kind of come together. What does that look like?
Yeah, so specifically with Lighthouse Labs, I mentioned that we launched it with no funding or support there. But the next cohort, we had 2 individual angel investors, and they gifted us $50,000 a piece, each of them. So, that was kind of we were able to prove to them in round 1 that, okay, we can move the needle with our entrepreneurs. And then they helped fund that. Now, the goal was to not come back to them every year. Those individuals should not be the people that are continuing to fund this in perpetuity. So the next year, we actually, we were able to use that traction. The SBA funded our next cohort. And then Capital One and Altria, have a number of 8 Fortune 500s in the Richmond region. So we engaged them to come on and be additional partners. And that then helped us align with our biotech research park. So at this point, Lighthouse Labs sits within the biotech park under an initiative called Activation Capital. That positioning has allowed, it was an established entity that already had relationships within the government and, could continue to lobby and support these efforts. So that's really helped it, without that, we would have to be raising constantly, but it gave the infrastructure and the relationships so that, some of the, the larger partners could continue to fund it. And then on the small business side, what is really neat is that there's a vast mentor network that engages in the programs. They come in and, we have like a mentor matchmaking events, and, we really bring people on based on their subject matter expertise, to one, talk about their own stories, but two, to open up their networks to help the companies get a little bit further down the road.
Awesome. And Gabe, how's that same kind of framework, how's that looked in the Kansas City market? Because I know, obviously, you guys have a unique framework with the Mary Ewing Kauffman Foundation playing, I would say, an incredibly important role in that public-private partnership.
Yeah, no, well, definitely, whenever Kauffman speaks, everybody listens, I think, here. But no, I mean, Kauffman, I think, is a really great job at convening, and really pushing and sharing the understanding and research, in regards to the importance of entrepreneurship and ecosystem building. But I think ecosystems are made up of people, and people make up organizations. And so it's really all about having these conversations and being in contact and also being honest, which I think sometimes here in the Midwest, we sometimes struggle with. We call it Kansas City nice. And so, we have the digital sandbox, which is really great example of the UMKC University and coming together to work and help launch individuals who have ideas. So they provide the initial funding to create a proof of concept for those in the tech industry, but then you'll have organizations like the city, and then the city will come and step in and work with some of these groups to be able to bring them in. So they recently brought in an organization into the city. So the city has a lot of data and access to data, but they didn't know how to utilize it, how to maximize, what they had in front of them. So they worked in with the digital sandbox, for example, to be able to create data tracking metrics and software that they're now using with the different departments, especially within just the permit and licensing department. And then they take that. Now they're sharing that information so we have Kansas City, Missouri, but then we have Kansas City, Kansas, which is on the Kansas side. Now we're bringing folks together and sharing best practices from that and sharing those resources. And so at the same time, it's growing our entrepreneurs. Now we have private companies that are coming in, realizing the access to the different data and information that they've been able now to gather and create into visualization. And now these private companies are now being able to utilize this data and access to information that nobody had access to even just 2 years ago. And I think that's an example as to how you can have the entrepreneurial ecosystem really working together, whether it's private entities, government agencies, universities, but that's, I think, a really good example. And my mind's going blank on the name of the company. I know the name is on the tip of my tongue.
That's all right. You're on the spot here, so we won't hold it against you. Okay, so we've had a couple references to education, from the metaphor of the K-12 schooling process for the entrepreneur to the university. Gabe, you mentioned a UMKC framework. Larkin, we know you've got the VCU framework. Jeff, talk a little bit about kind of the education partnership, because again, one of the things that we see in Mobile is for many of our people, they're going to come to entrepreneurship, and it tends to be later on in life, and maybe they've not been building towards it. Maybe they've only thought that their traditional roles and jobs are what's allowed for them. What have you guys done in Omaha to kind of bake that into your educational partners to build that awareness?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And sorry for the background noise. We're actually in a construction development with Millwork Commons. So as an ecosystem evolves and changes over time, so do we. So no, I think in Omaha, what we've done around the educational institution and kind of component side of things, it was very siloed in the state. So the University of Nebraska has campuses across the state in Kearney, in Lincoln, and in Omaha, Nebraska. But those entities were operating in silos as well, right? And so one of the things that we've done over the years is go to the universities and say, hey, how do we do, a startup competition, or how do we do, launch a CEO club, right? Where these young students within the educational institutions, not only at the University of Nebraska, but also at the community colleges as well, looking at them and saying, hey, let's get something started within these educational institutions, right? And just see where they go. A lot of times, again, we've said the word people a lot. It takes somebody on the inside of these educational institutions to see the power of ecosystem building and to see the power of what we're trying to do around building entrepreneurship within the university side of things as well. But again, we're fortunate here, I think, over time, and again, this didn't happen overnight. This is probably the course of 7 to 9 years of work within kind of the educational institutions to go to some of the top leadership within those, the key stakeholders, the key decision makers, and saying, hey, we just want to start small, but, trying to almost sell it to the universities to say, this is essential for you, right? To give your students the opportunity to say, hey, you want to not only learn about entrepreneurship from a textbook or from courses, but hey, how about we take that CEO club that we launched at the University of Nebraska, at Lincoln, or at Omaha, for instance, and bring them into where I'm at today, Millwork Commons, and they can see what a startup looks like, right? So they can go upstairs, and visit with a startup that scaled from 3 people in Nebraska to now, Flywheel was acquired by WP Engine just a year ago. But again, it was 3 local university students here that grew Flywheel into a 300-person company, right? So it's those real world examples for the students to be able to see, I think is really what we're trying to focus on. And again, I know a couple of panelists touched on too, making sure that we're, for those students and individuals that aren't going through traditional career path, giving them the on-roads and the ability to get in the door as well, right? So again, we can't leave talent on the sidelines. And so focus on the educational side, but also if somebody's coming through community colleges or, career transition, making sure that those individuals aren't falling by the wayside either.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Todd, can I touch on some of the things that they were saying around? So I at the University of Tulsa, they have a program called the Global Scholar Program, and traditionally they've worked with entrepreneurs in Panama. With COVID, we couldn't do that, and so talking to Dr. Foley at the University of Tulsa and saying, we have entrepreneurs here, and maybe the not the shiny, high tech, high growth kind of entrepreneurs that you think about, because that's the idea of entrepreneurship. But we got students connected with local business owners, and we worked on a capstone project where they were trying to help these entrepreneurs navigate this new territory of who their customer is. Because there's a woman here that I work with. She's owned her business for 35 years. And with COVID, 40% of her business went away. She did a lot of catering. She owns a deli and a catering organization. And so when the big chunk of your money goes away, but then what we realized was there were customers coming in. She didn't lose as much revenue, but her business model changed. Now, having those students who weren't business majors and entrepreneur majors, they were actually engineering majors and nursing majors. They just became more of a problem-solving crew and helped her connect with the current people that were coming into the program, help engage the university students to learn about her business. So all of that to say, it takes all kinds, and it's not just about creating the new thing. It's about being a problem solver for the problems in your city. I think sometimes, like, the whole idea of being the next Silicon Valley makes it very intimidating, because we don't feel like in Omaha or in Richmond or Kansas City or Tulsa that we can be the next whatever huge thing it is. And then I wanted to talk about the give first thing. And I push back a little bit on the give first, only because I think that sometimes that's intimidating as well, to think, what, maybe what I have isn't worth what other people need. So I'm going to invite all of you to come with a sharing mindset. Sometimes we have to learn a little bit about what's going on to be able to, and realize the gifts that we can give, or the services and the talents that we can share. Because you work in government doesn't mean that you don't have, maybe you don't have the equity that a capital investment company has, but you actually know how entrepreneurs are going to need to navigate through the city in order to do the thing that they're meant to do. So each one of us has a role, and maybe it takes a little bit of time to identify what that particular role is, right? Before you can jump in and say, here's what I've got to offer. So don't be intimidated by knowing that, you should come and give and whatever. Some of us need to get a little before we need to, figure out what we can get.
That's a great clarification. Thank you. And I think it's really interesting. There's a couple pieces that you guys have touched on. One of the things I think that we in the South, to a certain extent, have struggled with is this idea of what failure looks like. Because again, there's going to be times we're going to come in, and the thing is that's been in our brain, that $1 million idea or $1 billion idea now, because everything's got to be a unicorn, is it's going to come and it's going to meet real customers, and we're going to find out it doesn't work. So rather than stepping out and learning and growing and potentially failing, we recognize that that's something. So we're working to, how do we normalize kind of the language around that? How do we work to be able to say, no, we don't want fatality, but we want you to be able to learn how to get in and try. And so something that has had an outsized impact on our community, at least in starting of new ventures, has actually been the startup weekend. So we've actually had a number of seeded ventures that have come out of that, which is a little bit unique in that. So before we go to everybody's questions, because I know they're flying in right now, I see some coming through chat, some through coming privately. If you guys would, what is maybe one thing, event, program, people, whatever, that had an outsized impact on the work that you've done in your community? Something that maybe you would say, for the amount of time you put in, the actual outcome has really given you a 5x, 10x type return, and really no order. So if you've got one that comes to your mind, Larkin, Jeff, Cecilia, Gabe, go ahead on that one.
So I'm going to be a little more general on this, just because there's a really neat thing that's happening in Virginia at the moment. But just developing the ecosystem and for Richmond has actually had an impact on our state level, where right now there's an initiative called Go Virginia. And so by seeing what we did there, they're like, how do we help this occur in other parts of the state? So they've taken our state and divided it up into 9 regions, and each region will get about $2 million a year to put into their entrepreneurial ecosystem building efforts. So
I'm crying a little bit as you said that, Larkin.
and that's per region. I mean, it's fantastic. So we've got, it took a while to get to that point. So it's like, I wouldn't say it was not a low effort approach, but it does, it like makes me the hair raise up on my neck just to think of like how this has had that kind of an influence. And we don't even know what those results will be yet, because they're just now putting this in place and starting to fund initiatives in those regions. But
that's great.
Tagging on to the idea of an event like a startup weekend. I think startup weekends are great. I think all of those, Global Entrepreneurship Week, all of those things are wonderful. What I think is even more important is what happens afterwards. Mm-hmm. We don't think about that. We focus so much on the event, getting the event together, making sure that it goes without a hitch and all of those things. But I know that Larkin and I didn't just become friends at an eShip Summit, right? Or a Startup Champions Network Summit. We kept in contact and built that relationship, right? So I know Gabe, I know that I can contact Gabe if I need something. And it's what you do. It's the on-ramps and off-ramps of having a single engagement. Your investment isn't in the event. Your investment is in the outcome of the event. And we don't focus nearly as much as we should on what comes afterwards. So how do you take all those people that came to Startup Weekend and say, hey, so even if you didn't launch your idea, hey, maybe you'd like to be part of a team to help brainstorm on something else.
That's great.
That's really good. And it kind of dovetail on that too. Everyone talks about Big Omaha and the event that brought in people from all over the country, but it really started, frankly, this was when Twitter was kind of coming onto the scene back in, I don't know, maybe 08, 09, right? And we did small tweet ups, and we'd go to a coffee shop or we'd go to a local tavern, right? And it started with 5 people, and we all had our Twitter handles and our name tags because we didn't actually meet each other in person yet. So it was kind of this like coming out of COVID, but back in 08, 09. But again, I really think community is really rooted in humanity, right? It's some of the basic principles of how we treat each other. And if we can just understand somebody's name, what they're passionate about, and what they want to get plugged in, and where they can provide skills, assets, creativity to the community, then I think we're winning, right? And so, there's a lot of terms and a lot of books and a lot of kind of head knowledge where we can all get stuck. But I think when we boil it down to it, really, it's like, hey, how do we find somebody that wants to make a city, a community, a neighborhood, organization better, figure out what they're passionate about, what makes them tick, get them connected, and then get out of the way. And that's where the real excitement and the real power happens, I think. So I'd say, don't if you're thinking about community building and you see big events or flashy events that have hundreds of people or lots of sponsorship dollars, again, boil it down to say, what are the small things that you can do on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis in your own backyard to really try to build, create, and kind of grow that community organically.
Awesome.
Yeah, and jumping on that, yeah, that's something that we've tried to been proactive on. For the last 2 years, we've had what we call the eShip Communities Council, made up of various ESOs and entrepreneurs who are looking to continuously look to see how do we help improve the entrepreneurial ecosystem here? Where are the gaps? Our big focus, as I mentioned, has really been on how are we creating on-ramps for more inclusivity. And so we started to, it was predominantly ESOs that were made up of this and some government agencies. But now, we have folks on there like Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas. We have another organization that works with refugees called Mission Adelante, and bringing folks who already have trust in the communities that are working with folks that have a passion and want to get entrepreneurship, but have been disconnected totally, and seeing how do we all work together. And it all started by just having a monthly conversation where we brought folks together, and who do you know that needs to come to the table, and what are you doing, how can we help each other better support and grow our organizations, how are we making sure that we're not duplicating efforts, how do we help amplify what's already out there, how do we get that information into other languages, into other communities that aren't getting the information. And so we continue to meet here on a monthly basis now here for 2 years now, but that I think has been really impactful to really help grow the entrepreneurial ecosystem here.
I love it because, again, you're hearing consistently in all of these locations and all of the work that's happening, the importance and the impact of community and relationships. And thank you for that Margaret Wheatley quote, no matter the problem, community is the answer. I think that's a phenomenal piece that's there. There's a couple questions that have kind of come in through the chat, and I do want to hit those. And I know everybody's time is valuable, so I don't want to sit here and go forever because, frankly, I think we could probably send questions to you guys left and right because, again, we're all deeply passionate about growing our community. A question came in for you, Jeff. In your introduction, it said, I understand you've apparently worked to bypass space, and there I just lost the here. Hold on, we'll get to it. Okay, bypass space in identifying potential investments. How do you make that work, and what does that mean for smaller entrepreneurship communities? So bypassing space in identifying potential investments.
Yeah, really kind of to touch on that, a lot of it is connecting with other investors, right? And those could be investors in Minneapolis or Kansas City or St. Louis, right? Or Tulsa, but also investors from the coast, right? And this is something I think that we've seen more and more of, right? Like as you build a company in a startup community, you shouldn't strive to say, hey, how do we get the attention of New York or San Francisco? Because New York and San Francisco is everywhere now, frankly. But really, how can we work with other seed stage investors or other Series A investors from the area, from the region, sharing those deal flows, concepts or companies that come through the pipeline. So again, I think that's, gets back to the relationship side as well, right? It's maybe give first before asking, right? To say, hey, we're seeing a company come out of Omaha, we can't get funding here in Omaha or out of Lincoln. How do we work with the startup communities, from Des Moines, right? Or from Cedar Rapids, where there may be an investor there that is, passionate around fintech or a different vertical that they might not be able to get funding through here. So I think in summary, a lot of it is to say, hey, how do you work with other like-minded investors, when you're looking for that seed funding or the next level of funding. And it may not be in our own backyard, right? And so that's kind of doing the hard work and putting in the time and the homework needed.
Awesome. Let me hit this one because Nate, I'm not sure who your question specifically was focused on, but Valerie asked the question, what specific benchmarks are you capturing or have identified to measure success and ensure the approach program is duplicatable? I think that's the way you say that word, measurable and sustainable. Anybody benchmarks, and what are you capturing there?
I think as far as connectivity in an ecosystem, I think Forward Cities does a great model. They have what they call an E3 scorecard, and it's about the connectivity of an ecosystem and measures things from what people think about as far as storytelling and there's a great website called Ecosystem Builder Hub. It's EB Hub. And they talk about ecosystem building stories, not entrepreneur stories. So you're not measured by the number of exits or the number of ventures, startups, whatever, but actually the connectivity of a community. So that's the one I would say. And I believe, Gabe, if I'm not mistaken, that tool is free, and you could probably contact them to create a link specifically for Mobile and have your community tell you what they think.
Thank you so much for for pitching it for me, Cecilia. No, yes. Our research department has created what they call the E3 scorecard, which is really focused on measuring entrepreneurial ecosystems in metro areas across 4 different areas. So first is just the people that make up the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So the talent, the champions, the ecosystem builders. Who are those? How are they connected? They're measuring the programs and the places. Where are people meeting at? What are the programs that are existing that develop and strengthen entrepreneurs? And then what are the networks that exist? What are they policies, supports? What's the capital and the funding looking like? So that falls under that. And then the narratives. What are the stories? What's propelling the energy and pushing that the entrepreneurial ecosystem forward? So I can put it in the link. I'll find it here and I can shoot that out to you all. But it's a free assessment tool that any ecosystem can utilize to measure your current situation.
All right. I know our time is short. We've got to move into our 5 points in our entrepreneur focus with what Brooks is working on. Panelists, if you guys would, if there is kind of one 30-second takeaway that you would say, a piece of advice or a lesson learned, that's kind of that takeaway quote, if you would share that real quick. I think it's worth just kind of having those pieces. And what we like to do is kind of pull those things into social media to be able to share those. So if there's maybe one little glimpse that you could give us, we'll take that.
I think what we've said prior is that none of us have all the answers, but each of us have parts of the answer. So it takes all of us to solve these problems.
That's great.
I've got a quote that I kind of reference with friends quite often. It's everyone has a story. It's will we take the time to wait long enough to listen to what that story is, right? And so that's one that I kind of try to keep top of mind as this is an ongoing journey and we can't accomplish it in a year or 5 years or 10 years even.
Awesome.
Yeah, tying into that, I think what we like to say is the work moves at the speed of trust. and so having the relationships, taking the time to build those relationships between organizations and community becomes really important. And so you can't force it, but you can, move together and work together to build that trust.
Awesome. Larkin?
I would say always put the entrepreneur at the center of the work. Especially when we get into ecosystem support organizations, it's people can quickly and easily just kind of focus on, like, just not interview the entrepreneur, not make sure their mission aligns. That's where some of these silos get built up, because they're doing it for maybe some other kind of a gain, versus just saying, is this for the entrepreneur? How can we help them? And through that, you then, can build that collective community and build on the trust. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. If you guys have any questions for them that we didn't get to today, if you would just send those either to myself or Angela Jordan, and we will work to get what we can addressed. Jeff, Larkin, Gabe, Cecilia, thank you guys so much. If we would, let's just, yeah, there we go. Even on our mute, you guys are seeing the appreciation and love. This was incredibly powerful. As we like to do, and we make that transition to the next part of this program, you guys are welcome to stay on and hear from our folks, but I know you're all busy. So if you want to, I know I'm standing between you and lunch, possibly even. So I try not to get in that way too much, but you guys are welcome to stay on and also welcome to leave. Thank you guys so much for that.
Todd, great job. And to the panel, Gabe, Cecilia, Jeff, Larkin, great job. Thank you so much. I think we all listened attentively and in the back of our mind saying, okay, we've got that, but maybe not that yet. We'll work on it. Got some new reading ideas, some great quotes. And Larkin, I had to smile when you talked about the city leadership who not only told you not to do it, but that you would be an embarrassment. We have not had that problem here. We've been very lucky. But I am reminded of that quote from Brad Felt's book on startup community when he said, sometimes every startup community could just use a good few quality funerals. So I've never forgotten that. Thankfully, it hasn't applied in our situation. And I certainly hope it doesn't apply to me one day. But you guys were great. We really appreciate it. And the Margaret Wheatley quote, one of my favorites, is from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of committed and dedicated people can change the world. In fact, it's always been the case. And I think you're a tribute to your community. We really appreciate your sharing. So thank you so much. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Makeda Nichols, one of my favorite people, one of our mentors. And I would say one of the most interesting people you will ever run across. If you look at her bio here, next, you can see just how diverse her background is. Raised in Ethiopia, German boarding school. And this is a funny story I got to share. So I read Addis Ababa and I was like, oh my God, Angela Jordan has finally made a mistake in the spelling of the name. I said, that's Addis Ababa. Well, sure enough, there's an alternate spelling of Addis Ababa and I got it wrong and she got it right. So tribute to Angela there. But Makeda went to college in Germany, BS in chemistry and physics. She actually worked at Degussa, now Evonik, for 7 years, and then made a huge pivot in her career and moved into insurance and has never looked back. Has all the designations you want. And I know not only does she have a successful business, she is not only a mentor for us, but I hear stories of people, particularly interns, who have gone to work with her, for her, in her business, and she takes special care to make sure that that they are on the right path and learn great life lessons. So Makeda, thank you so much for being a part of today's program, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Sounds very impressive. Thank you, Michael. I was very impressed with the speakers. A lot of their advices was very impressive and kind of reminded me of my mother. The 5 points that I'm presenting today, I didn't invent it. I got a majority of it from my mother. She was a very influential person. And my former boss. My mother was way ahead of her time in Ethiopia. She was born and raised, she was born in Guadeloupe and then was raised in Madagascar. My father was a French, her father was a French guy in the army, a sergeant, and my grandmother was a Madagascarian. And so with age 21, she decided to leave and marry my dad, who was a doctor. And so she arrived in Ethiopia with, as you can say, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And she didn't understand the custom that in Ethiopia, as a woman, you are seen, but you're not, vocal. So she was a very outspoken woman and determined. She had her own farm. She was one of the few people who figured out how to import, export to Djibouti. Djibouti is a desert and has no vegetables, no flowers. So she decided she was going to start exporting and do her own farm. And at the time, my father said, "You're crazy. You can't be doing that. You know, women are not supposed to be doing these things." And she kept on saying, "You watch me." So she was a woman that did not take no. And I could not say no to my mom. So she taught me a lot of things. And thanks to her, I feel like I am where I'm at today. So these are my 5 points. The first one I got from my boss: set daily goals, yearly and 5-year. Set a daily goal, yearly and 5-year goal. It's very important that you know where you're going. And that's what I tell my young people that come in my office. You have to have a plan. You can't just start something and do something, because life otherwise will dictate where you're going to go. So I try to train my staff and myself. Every October, we sit down, we plan for the following year, set our goals. And believe it or not, we pretty much reach our goals. And it's a good feeling when you see you have accomplished your goals. Then the other thing I learned from my mom: do things other people do not like to do. And one of the things that she made me do is weed. I had to go into her vegetable garden, cornfields, and weed, which I hated to do. But she said, "This is going to teach you for later on in life to do things that you don't like to do." And I'm grateful to her, because when I came to the States, I couldn't get a job because I was young and didn't realize that when you go on a job interview, you don't say, "Yes, I plan to have children." So I didn't get a job. And my first job was a seamstress, because I went to all the chemical plants and they asked me, "Are you planning, you just got married, you plan on having children?" I said, "Yes." But back then, they could ask you those questions. So I went to work as a seamstress for a while and worked my way up. And looking back, I'm grateful that my mom taught me those lessons. Then the other thing I got from a Chinese friend of mine who's a real estate agent, he always said to me, "Leave something behind for the next person behind you." And basically, what we heard from the people today from the panel, they're saying it's important that you give and look out for other people. And when you do that, you're going to see that the world will bless you and give you more. And I've been very grateful for the people in my life. And so far, I have to say, things have turned out really good, and I believe in that. And then you are never out of school. That's what Ken Curry used to always say to me. So that's very important that you are willing to learn. Even at my age today, 66, I come in here and learn this new computer system, even though my blood pressure goes up sometimes, but I learn and it feels good. It's an accomplishment to think, okay, I'm still open to learn, and that keeps you young. The other thing that's very important that my mom always said, because we had like farm workers that worked for us, and we had maids. I'm not trying to be snobby, but that's how it is in Ethiopia. You had a lot of people helping you, basically. And she always said to me, recognize the people who brought you to the dance. Be humble and grateful to the people who helped you get where you are today. So when I look back on that, I'm very grateful for the essential workers that we had during the pandemic. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have any, we wouldn't have no groceries, the hospital workers, all those people. So you remember those people that helped you, that are there for you, just because they're not in the high-powered jobs or, college educated, it doesn't mean that they're not important. And I try to say thank you to people who are around me. Doesn't matter if they're small or big. And that's what I try to teach my people here in the office. If it wasn't for our clients, we wouldn't be where we are today. So we should be grateful to them. Those are my 5 points for today.
Well, Makeda, those are beautiful. So I know I've asked you this 1,000 times, but I think the group would be interested. How many languages do you speak?
I speak four. What is German, French, Amerindia, and English. And believe it or not, English is the toughest language because English has so many different meanings. So, you have to figure out what do they mean. While German to me is the easiest. It's direct and it tells you exactly what they want, and it's simple.
Well, I agree with you. I have trouble with English all the time. So I will tell you that your comments reminded me of two quick quotes. One is derived from a scene in Alice in Wonderland that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And it's, of course, about the importance of planning. And in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, he basically proclaims that the world and the future belongs to those people who consider themselves lifelong learners. So your points are right in line there. And I think you're absolutely right. Well, thanks so much, Makeda. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we have a special treat today, and I'm going to kind of turn the program over to Brooks, who has the Mobile Rundown. And if you don't know anything about the Mobile Rundown, you're in for a treat because there's a lot to talk about. So Brooks, you have the floor. And I think, Paul, if we'd make sure that we can let him share his screen.
Cool, appreciate that. Yeah, I'm gonna have a little slideshow for you for a little pre-prep for your lunch at 1. So let's see here. Share screen.
There it is. I can see it.
All right, you guys can see it. Cool. Let me present this. Let me move myself out. Y'all probably don't want to see that.
You're okay. You're full screen now with the slide. And
got it. Okay, great. Let me get, I have y'all on my screen, so let me get that out of the way. All right, cool. And real quick, first, two thoughts. Jeff, the tweet up idea. I like that idea. Instead of a meetup, it's a tweet up. I thought that was cool. So that's something I wrote down. And then number 4 on the 5 points, you're never out of school. I feel like that explains my entire venture for the last probably 10 to 15 years of my personal business career. I am constantly learning new stuff. So, and you'll probably see that today. So I'm going to tell you briefly about kind of more about us. Mobile Rundown, definitely a huge part of that. And we're going to touch on that real quick. But like, I have friends all the time that are close friends of mine. And they're like, man, like, what do you do? Like how, like, what exactly do you do? So quickly, I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about us. So we jokingly call we act like we have this parent entity called Conkle Inc. So Conkle is our last name. That's not we're not actually incorporated as Conkle Inc. And our running joke is that we're like a micro venture capital firm, but instead of doing 7-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure, 10-figure deals, we're doing like 3-figure, 4-figure, 5-figure deals. So that's what we've got going on. That's kind of our little internal joke with Mandy and I. By the way, while I'm talking to you guys, if you come up with ideas for me, questions or brainstorm type things, I want all of that. Like that's what I love. So anything comes up, it doesn't have to be, it can be in the chat. It can be a personal message to me. It can be to whoever, but, okay. So these are actual entities, that we are involved in. So the Mobile Rundown sits under Kia Marketing LLC, and it also spurred the idea for events. So, talk about us, the evolution of business is things I feel like lead to things. We haven't had ultimate ideas. Like I can't tell you 10 years from now, this is exactly where X is going to be, because every few months, I feel like leads to another idea that's related to the current one. And it's almost like they show up as we walk down the road. I don't know. That's the best way I can describe it. So Forefront Real Estate, we both have broker's licenses. We operate some rentals, some Airbnb properties. The next 2 entities are both event-based businesses. So kind of spurred from the Mobile Rundown. The idea from the Mobile Rundown was that we were wanting to connect the community. One way to do that was going to be through fun events. So then out of that launched Gulf Coast BizCon, which was a business event that we ran in 2019. In the middle of 2020, we were marketing, promoting, selling tickets, and you guys know what happened in 2020. And so we literally canceled the event, which is kind of disheartening for us, but it is what it is. Mobtown Events runs this event called the Mobile King Cake-Off, which is a local event. We have other business partners in that. And then I'm also partnered in another company called Cartridge World of Mobile that deals in printers, inks, and toners. Now, you would probably think, or you would ask the question like, hey, aren't you kind of diversified? Like, aren't you a little scattered? Don't you have a little bit too much going on? I would actually answer that in one, yes, I actually agree that we have a little bit too much going on, and we're looking to like consolidate some of the things that we're doing and streamline some of the things. But some things have happened that, okay, so in 2020, changed my answer to that. When 2020 happened, it actually saved our business. It saved Conkle Inc. for us to have a number of things going on, because we had projects that went to zero. The Mobile Rundown, in fact, went to zero, being an events-based business, which I'm about to tell you about. BizCon got canceled. Our Airbnb rentals, everything canceled in the month of April, and I thought we were going to go out of business. Because we were diversified, it actually allowed us, I'm going to say, to stay in business and actually then turn around and prosper. So like, there are pros and cons with having a lot going on. I would personally make that argument. Okay, this I just have to show you because this is kind of like my personal mantra. So don't just think outside the box, destroy the box. And I'm actually I'm in the middle of getting this trademarked. Of actually, the U.S. Attorney's Patent Office had a call with them, and they are. It's like in this Gazette thing. I've learned that whole process of how that works as well, which I didn't know before. It's in the Gazette, and so I don't think anyone is. I don't feel like anyone's going to yell and say, "Hey, this is my thing" or whatever. So we are getting this trademarked, and in regards to education. So the reason this started probably 5 years ago for me. So we always talk about thinking outside the box. So I'm going a step further and just saying, hey man, just completely destroy it, like destroy the box. And the whole point is just to invoke thinking, right? So that's what I try to do in our businesses. Okay, I show you this because I had friends ask me, Brooks, how in the world do you actually make money? Like, what do you actually do? So I wrote an article about it on my personal brand. And if you want to check it out, you can. I thought maybe we had a handful of income streams. Turns out we had almost 20. I didn't even know it until I sat down to write this article. And it's crazy. Now, the majority of them are very small, right? Very small income streams, but it's the 80-20 principle. A smaller percentage of them make up the bulk of our income and revenue. But yeah, if you'd be interested, happy to have you read that. So the Mobile Rundown. So it launched. This brand itself launched in 2011, and here's how it started. A friend and I missed some events in town that we thought were cool. We were like, man, that was cool. How do we miss that? We said, I don't know. How did we miss that? So we said, well, let's start our own list and just like tell people what's going on. And so that's how it began. And so in 2011, basically we had, this was the business, if you want to call it a business. We emailed 500 friends weekly. We said, hey, here's what's happening. Now in 2021, we have a readership of about 70,000. Now that's across our email list, our website, blog posts, social media, text messages. We send out like 1,300 texts a week. It's kind of crazy. We have a podcast. We actually have spun print out of this brand, which started as all digital. And now we have a project that's actually really near and dear to us, and I'm going to tell you about. I think it's the next slide. I'll tell you. Side note: if you know someone that wants to do some sales, we're kind of looking for some folks right now, so keep that in mind. If you have anyone, please send them my way. Okay, so the Do Some Good magazine project. So here's what happened. This was not a plan 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Well, actually it was 3 years ago because I was the first one. 4 years ago, it was not even on our radar. What happened was we had a segment in the email every week that was where we were highlighting a nonprofit. We had it lined up so far in advance that we had the idea, hey, what if we put out a special project where we did nothing but highlight, like a standalone project where we could highlight nonprofits and organizations doing good in the area. This magazine was born. So we launched the first one 3 years ago. and we've just put out our third one. So 2021 just came out. You can read it digitally if you go to themobilerundown.com. This year, a new thing, we're actually interviewing and creating podcasts and video interviews of any organization that's in the magazine. And so I want you to know about it yourself, so that if your company would want to sponsor an organization, like these organizations are either having to pay for their spot, or they're getting a sponsor, or we helped them get a sponsor. And we also have advertisers in the magazine. So maybe you have an organization that's not in the magazine. We want them in the magazine. Like, so one thing we found is that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of great organizations, and we just want to be able to highlight as many of them as possible in the future. So I just wanted you guys to know about that project that we have. All right. And so that, going back to that, this relates to what kind of the number 4 of you're never out of school. And it also goes to how everything for us has connected and related over the last, I don't know, a dozen years of my, of me learning business. So like, I learned to build websites, and then I've learned from that, I can, brands have come out of that, learn how to do marketing via email newsletters. Well, then out of that, I then learned later how to produce multimedia on YouTube and on podcasts, and how to do live streaming shows. Then even after that, I've kind of very recently come upon keyword research and SEO, which is like my newfound, oh my gosh, I'm out of school. Number 4, you're never out of school, because I feel like I'm in this new magic land of learning in my entrepreneurial career, which these are things that I'm actually being able to push back into the Mobile Rundown and all of our other brands. So this is my personal brand, brooksconkle.com. So over the last 8 months, I just want to show you guys this, because of my new schooling, I've been able to, basically what this means is 3 million impressions on Google. So when someone searches something, they've seen me on a page 3 million times over the last, I guess that's 8 months. And they've actually clicked and come to my website almost 30,000 times. And so I'm pumped for this. And now I'm able to take these ideas and translate them into my other business projects, like the Mobile Rundown. And so that's, again, it's led to more. So I actually started a niche website. There's an entire industry of buying and selling websites as businesses, which I didn't even know existed. I recently made an offer on a personal finance website, and the deal did not work out. It actually is best that it didn't work out. So these are things that have happened in our business process. Our networking has changed. We're building online relationships actually with people around the world. And I don't know where it will lead. And that's actually really, really exciting for me in my business. I feel like it's the way my last 5 to 10 years has gone. And I feel like it's where the next 20 years or whatever. So I'm looking forward to the next 20 years. I have no idea where that's going to officially lead us, but I'm excited about the journey. And I don't know if we do chat or questions or whatever with me, or if it's just a sharing thing, not sure, but happy to take anything. Reach out to me, and I appreciate everyone's time.
Okay, Brooks, great job. You absolutely do have a lot going on. It's impressive. Any questions? We have just 1 or 2 minutes. We want to end in about 6. Any questions of Brooks? If you do, just please, you can place them in the chat. Or Brooks, you have your email address handy?
Yeah, sure. I'll put it in the chat.
Or any suggestions. I think he was looking for salespeople. So if you have someone who might fit that bill, please send the name and contact information of Brooks. All right, Angela, wanted to turn over the announcements to you.
Yeah, it's just a couple of brief announcements before we close. We want to say welcome to our 3 new companies, and we have just added, they've gone through orientation now, Azalea Street Designs, Cypress Environment and Infrastructure, and Third Kind Consulting. And so these are some companies we'll be sending out some information about to our mentors, to start forming some teams for them and get them meeting. We're about to take our summer break. Typically, we don't have a monthly meeting in July or December. And, probably for obvious reasons, people go on vacation or are busy with their families, do other things. And so our next meeting will be Wednesday, August 18th, and same time, 11:30 a.m. and location to be announced. And that's really all I've got.
Okay, Angela, thanks. So I think I've mentioned before, we'll be talking to Michelle and trying to transition into the innovation portal at some point. So we'll be trying to nail that down shortly. And as things seem to soften up in terms of the restrictions, our plan is to go live, and we'll be in touch with all of you shortly about kind of what that means going live in August. So we'll be monitoring the news and the guidance as we go along. So I can't remember if I mentioned Danette Richards' name when I was talking about the chamber on the leadership team. If I forgot to mention Danette, I want to mention her now. And of course, she was the one who texted me through chats saying that I should have known better than to question Angela. So I appreciate that, Danette. You're absolutely right. Any questions before we close? I will say that we are looking at speakers now. If you have ideas for speakers in the future, I have a list of folks that we'll be contacting, but if you have any ideas, please let me know, and we'll be happy to consider them. And it is 3 minutes before 1 o'clock. Let's see, Nate's holding up something. Looks like a heart. So
he said Danette, heart Danette.
Oh, okay. Well, I was feeling the love until someone told me Danette's name was underneath the heart, Nate. But anyway, great to see all of you. Thanks to our panelists again, and Makeda, Brooks, great job. And we'll be in touch with you shortly about details for the August meeting. So take care.